I have compiled, okay. And I have compiled, well, about an hour-long lecture about Latvian art overall. So it would be like a quick oversight, I guess. And then if you have any questions, I will try to answer them. I'm not promising I will know everything that you want to know, but I will try to answer. So let's begin. So this is the introduction into Latvian art. So first of all, I would like to say that, yes, so the first generation of professional Latvian artists as Latvians, as a people, it started around the 19th century. So before that, you couldn't say that it was a Latvian art, like Latvian professional art. Before that, it was more like arts and crafts, more like from the culture, from our mythology and our day-to-day life needs. So before that, there were actually, well, not Latvian professional artists. So they weren't schooled, they were mostly amateurs. And today we will go through the Latvian art a bit, how it grew through the ages. So the beginning, yes, the 19th century, and as I already said, that the Latvian territory was mostly filled with local amateurs as artists. So they filled some commissions for the churches, for the palaces and stuff. But mostly the churches and palaces and manors and other great buildings and commissions were made by foreign artists. So a lot of artists from Italy, from Germany, they were traveling here and who were already educated, and they were fulfilling the commissions, the bigger commissions. And Latvians as people weren't as educated at that time. So they were mostly amateurs making stuff around the home or around their own relative houses or needs, for fulfilling their needs. So the first Latvian artists, like you see here, like so Kārlis Huns and Jānis Stanslaustra. Jānis Stanslaustra is the artist of this picture you see here. So you can see that their careers or their working life, they began at the 19th century, like around the middle of the 19th century. So it was the first generation of Latvian, really Latvian educated artists. And yes, so you can see how, well, one of them painted. So this is Jānis Stanslaustra work. And it is quite, I think, quite interesting to see how lush and gold the frame is. And then you see the little girl or young lady with a chicken in her arms. So it's a bit interesting, this work. So how the great and royal gold frame is compiled with this well, quite modest young lady and her chicken. So it must be a special girl, you can say. And also the theme with the chicken is really interesting for me also. And so the other artists of this time and also the next ones, they were, as Latvia was the part of Russian Empire at that time, so the Latvian artists had the opportunity to study at that time, not abroad, but study at the Art Academy of the St. Petersburg in Russia. Some went other ways, and in the Russian Empire also, but mostly to St. Petersburg. And others also went to Germany to educate themselves in arts. As Latvian territory at that time, we didn't have our own art education at all at this time. So at the end of the 19th century, there were already many active Latvian artists. And therefore, the art education, or the creation of the art education in Latvia, was started. And the Art Academy of Latvia also was founded later at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. So at this time, we have the most known, I think, the most known Latvian artists as Vilhelms Purvītis, Jānis Rozentāls, Julijs Madernieks, Teodors Zaļkalns, and others. So they were already known at this point around Latvia, around the Russian Empire. And I probably need to mention that in comparison to the other art in Europe, so the artists in Europe that were more educated than the art education was had a longer time to develop. So they were Latvian artists compared to the Europe weren't that developed, but their interest was great in the current trends, as you can say, at that time, and they were really, really keen to learn about what was going on around the world, around Europe at this time and onwards. So this is one of the first artists of Latvian culture, so Artūrs Baumanis. As Latvian artists were really interested in what was happening around Europe, so the styles of the Europe at that time, so the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, it was mostly from realism to romanticism to, let me think, to, yes, so to Impressionism and onwards. So at the last part of the 19th century, there were these new modern styles developing around Europe. That was also really interesting for Latvian artists, but there were also some artists that were really more interested in the Latvian culture, like in Latvian history before the 19th century. So our ancient traditions, how this place we called Latvia began and onwards, and so on, so on. So Artūrs Baumanis was one of them who really was interested in how the Latvians looked at ancient times, like around the 12th or 13th century. He really was interested in this, and he depicted a lot of ancient happenings, ancient mythological traditions, and so on. So of course he didn't know how people looked at that time specifically, so some of this is mostly imagined how it would look. So there is a part of interest in the ancient Latvian ways, but also part of quite a big part of imagination at this point, how he imagined and also romanticized this scene in these ages 800 years ago or so. So this depicts the, how it was called, the horse of the destiny. So you can see that the white horse is asked or pulled to walk or step over the stick that is down on the road, and everyone is watching. So this is a part of a, how can you say, seeing who's right. So if the horse stepped over it, then it was an answer yes, or if the horse didn't step over it, it was an answer no, or maybe if the horse stepped, then with which hoof did he step over it. So they were seeing answers to questions, maybe, or maybe some kind of like a court, like who's right. So they they used the horse and tried to figure out the truth. And also the other part of Latvian artists, like Julijs Feders, for example, was really, they were all really great at being really realistic in their art. But of course, at that time, especially in Europe, the realistic art was a bit old. So there were artists that really sticked with the realistic style of painting and drawing. And there were those who were more keen to lean into the Impressionism, Fauvism, and so on. So Julijs Feders was one of them who really liked to depict nature and really realistically depict nature, but also with the, you can see, with the touch of romanticism. So he picked landscapes, especially that were romantic, that were like a bit, how can you say, a bit sweet on the side, you know, a bit foggy. There was this atmosphere, but he also really didn't step away from the realistic part. So this is one of our rivers, probably Daugava, but I can't lie, maybe it's Gauja, so don't punish me for that. But yes, so he really depicted Latvian nature really, really well, and he liked it. And he was one of those artists who were educated in the Russian academic ways. So the first thing to know about Russian Art Academy or Russian art is that they're really, really interested in the realistic painting. So this is the style that you could really get into and get best at if you were learning and studying in Russia. And of course, one of, or maybe the most known Latvian artists, Vilhelms Purvītis. So if you don't know anything about Latvian art, and if there's one name you take from this whole presentation, then it should be Vilhelms Purvītis. For you, I have two quite different paintings of his. So the one on the right, you can see the water and the snow melting and the birches. So this was really, this is a characteristic type of painting from Vilhelms Purvītis. He also was educated in Russia and also really was interested in Latvian nature, but you can see that this isn't a really quite truly realistic way. It's more towards the impressionistic style of painting here. So he was really interested in the then, there, and here and now painting, as Impressionism was all about the here and now. So he was really interested in that. But of course, he didn't quite take away from the realistic type side of the landscape. So he was somewhere a bit in between the realistic and the impressionistic style of art. At these pictures you can see here. So most of the artists, of Latvian artists that were really interested in Impressionism and post-Impressionism and styles onwards, they really were interested more in the technical type of how the art was created, and a bit less on the philosophy under the style. So Vilhelms Purvītis also took more of the technique of the Impressionism and less of the philosophy that comes with it originally. And the other one is actually a watercolor, so it isn't an oil painting. And you can see also how he tried also different kinds of brush strokes. Here, they are more, more expressionistic, as you can see, so less calm and less realistic. And also Vilhelms Purvītis was, as you probably know, because you went to the, you had the lecture from the art museum, you know that he was one of the people who really was interested in creating an art scene in Latvia. So he was one of those people who founded and helped to create Latvian Art Museum, as you can see here, the building. And the other building, which is just around the corner from this one, Latvian Art Academy, which is still there, which I went to and studied. It's a marvelous building. But yes, so Vilhelms Purvītis was the artist who really did really big things for Latvian art education and culture as well. And the other one, which is really, really prominent in Latvia also. So if you would ask maybe any Latvian on the street, like name two artists, and if they weren't really, well, you can say weren't really into art, then they would probably say Vilhelms Purvītis and Jānis Rozentals are those that I know from my heart, those those two artists they would know probably. So Jans Rosenthals is the other one who is really known. And you can see here two types of his paintings. So he also really liked the impressionistic, as you can see here. So the painting from life. So, and the other one is a composition. So he really liked the impressionistic style art, but also he was really into the Art Nouveau and symbolistic art. So here is a bit of taste of Art Nouveau and symbolism. So the painting is called Princess with a Monkey, and it's also really known painting from his. So you can see also how he was interested in the symbolisms and in the way he depicted people, not only the way how they really looked. And also he is a bit, he's also known probably in the Finland because his wife was Finnish singer, and some of his time he spent also in Finland. So he was also interested in what was happening at the north from Latvia. So he was also quite connected with the Finnish art scene. And the other from that time of the great artists of Latvia, so the first, the second generation, you can say, is Johannes Walters. And you can see that most of these artists, they all have in common that they are really well, they are quite realistic, but at the same time, their brushstrokes are quite impressionistic. So this is the time and the characteristics that are really common, and that was the new style, that was modern, that was interested in, that most artists were interested in at this time. So they tried it out, and then they tried it out how they liked it, so, and how they saw fit in their own work. So also you can see here, this one with the boys swimming is a bit earlier work, and this is a bit later work. So you can see the differences also. Johannes Walters was one of the artists who was also really educated in music, and I believe he also played an instrument. So he really liked to connect music with art at the same time. So some of his artworks are named from the terms of music, or you can sometimes people describe his works more like symphonies or the rhythms of music there sometimes when he, especially when he paints woods. So the other work is more, you can say, more expressionistic, more Fauvistic, as you can see. So also he moved to Germany at some point in his life, and he began to paint more freely at this time. So more expressionistic, more expressive, more fun. Well, probably fun, more bright colors. So he really grew from this more realistic type of artist to this more expressionistic, more expressive, more I guess more himself at that point. But also he didn't lose the eye for the realistic type of painting as well. Now, at this time, the artists, and especially after the after the First World War, when Latvia gained its gained its independence, excuse me. The artists were quite interested what was happening around them. So they were really open, and they could travel to Europe to study, and they could connect with other artists abroad. So this period in between the two wars was the most all the most expansive, you can say. So the artists could do much more than they could before when they weren't educated and they had connections. And especially when Latvia gained its independence, they were more free to be connected with other parts of the Europe and other parts of the world. So Latvian artists really explored the current styles and movements of the Europe, and they even traveled to study there or to gain more knowledge and learn from great artists. And our first generation of sculptors also studied from August Rodin at his workshop. And others who couldn't or wouldn't go abroad, they really had connections. So they wrote letters to other artists and especially studied books that were sent or came from the Europe. So the culture became more available, and really artists really tried to understand what Latvian art was going to be about at this time, because we finally had our independent country. So it was time also to understand, to search for what was the Latvian art, Latvian ways. So one part was really understanding what was going on around us in Europe, mostly, but the other part was also reaching into our roots before even Christianity came into Latvia. So before the 11th and 12th centuries. So Latvian artists were interested in the characteristics of Latvian traditional art, and they implemented them in the designs of chairs, of tables, of the interiors of buildings, and also in their visual arts. So yes, Latvian artists really tried every type of style they could get their hands on, you can say. And as I already mentioned, they tried them mostly in formal ways. So they tried their techniques and worried less about their philosophies. But that was, I guess, okay. So you could say that most Latvian artists at this time tried at least 2 or 3 types of, especially if we talk about painting, so painting techniques and styles at this point, until some of them really got what they were looking for, or others just kept on changing their styles from what was the new modern style of the year, of the decade. And this is one of the first sculptors, Latvian sculptors, so Teodors Zaļkalns. Here you can see 3 different works of his. So the first one up here, the lady, this is really impressionistic work, as you can say. It really reminds us of the August Rodin work and Impressionism at the sculptures. So this is actually one of my favorite sculptures, and it was exhibited at the National Museum of Art. So if some of you go there, you can actually see it. And I believe this is also as well there seen outside. So you can see really 3 different kinds of styles. So at the beginning, he was interested in the Impressionism. And then when the time came for example, the Cubism movement, so he was really interested in that, but also he didn't deform the portrait completely. So there's still some reminiscence of a person there. So as you can also, as I can say, one more time. So they tried these different kinds of techniques, but still stayed a bit loyal to their own feeling about what art was, maybe. And the third work, so the pig, you can see, is really a minimalistic, monumental. So the form is mostly one with minimal you can say minimal stuff on there. So this was also actually, this pig was made and thought of like a monument, a sculpture that needed to be placed at the market of Riga. So if anyone has been at the market of Riga, the big market with these angars, and so there was a square thought of for this pig, so kind of a symbol of the, well, I can say, of the country feeling of Latvia and the Latvian country. So this was planned to be put at the market, but it never happened. So it's actually a shame that it didn't, because it really would fit the place, I think. So of course, with the First World War, there were also Latvian artists who were soldiers, and also those who were brought into the art of depicting the fights of the war. So Jēkabs Kazaks, you can see here, he depicted the fugitives of this time. So also a bit of expressionism, a bit of cubism as well, you can say, but also the expressionism movement, which was really, appeared because of the war of the World War I and the terrifying stuff that was happening. So also Latvian artists used that expressionism to express also the negative and the painful emotions of this time. And Sigismunds Vidbergs, this is a graphic, you can say. He also depicted, you can see it's a bit rough, so a bit more straight lines. So also a bit of expressionistic technique, but it's, you can see there's lovers on the bridge. So it's also around this time of the World War I, and you can see the technique of the expressionism is used here, but the thing that is depicted is a bit different from the expressionism you can see. But also some of the expressionists also depicted everyday kind of scenes. So it's not that far off, but you can see that Latvian artists chose not only the expressionism that was meant for depicting the terrors of the war, but also the other kinds. And also, of course, if we talk about the Latvian independence, we need to talk about our Monument of Freedom. So the Monument of Freedom is standing, and it was erected in the late 30s. So it was created by Kārlis Zāle, also one of our great sculptors at that time. If you've been to Latvia or you're planning to visit, I would suggest you really try and get to climb up of the monument. So there are stairs here all the way to the top, beneath the lady's feet. There's a little window you can see on the both sides and look around the center of Riga. So it's really a great opportunity if you get the chance and find someone who can who can arrange it maybe. So this also was a great story, because as we had our first and maybe our second generation of sculptors, there were already women sculptors at this point. So one of the most known, or maybe some say that she was the first Latvian sculptor, she was Marta Skulme. So when the plan for Latvian Freedom Monument was made, she wanted to present her way. So she wanted to present her monument, her idea of the monument, when the contest was happening. And she had a really great idea at this point, and lots of other artists, lots of other sculptors were really also trying to present their ideas. But and she believed there were two parts of the contest, and that the first part, I believe she came first or second. So her monument was really appreciated, her idea. But when it came to the second part of the contest, I believe she even if maybe dropped out or just stepped out of the contest, and it was well, mainly because she was thinking of having children, so she put aside her needs and her wants for her work to be seen. So um, maybe if it did happen differently, maybe we would have our first freedom monument made by a lady sculptor, which would be really interesting, I think. But this one is also really great monument, I think. And you can see all different kinds of materials used. And also the top of the lady, we call her Milda. Um, and the lady is holding the three stars, also the symbolism of three Latvian lands and so on. This part, the Milda part, was actually um, either made in Sweden, or the Swedish artists also helped us to create it because of the hardship of the materials they were using at this time. So they didn't have the techniques or the machinery to create it in Latvia at this time. So they helped us with our monument. Now, at this time also, a bit more of the cubism, a bit more of symbolism. You can see artists like Niklaus Strunke and Rudolfs Perle. So Niklaus Strunke was really into this cubistic style of paintings, you can see. And Rudolfs Perle was, on the other hand, really interested in the symbolistic painting. So really deep in the symbolism, as well as maybe, the Lithuanian artist Čiurlionis. So he had a really similar type of paintings as well. So they're, well, you can say more symbolistic, more spiritual, even if you can. Well, I see a lot of spiritual meanings and feelings when I look at the Rudolfs Perle work, especially, and also the Čiurlionis work from the Lithuanian artist. So this shows that really Latvian artists tried different stuff, as I am repeatedly saying to you. And also to other artists, so Valdemars Tonis, Ģedarts Elias. And so I should probably mention that at this point there were, well, not really many, but a lot of Latvian female artists as well. But at this time they weren't quite prominent. There were some, but the Latvian female artists, the count of them and the prominence of them really grew when we became occupied, I guess. So from the 40s, 50s onwards. And at that point, the female Latvian artists really had their own place. Well, not completely, of course, as you can see and know all the how the female emancipation happened, but but at that point there was a place for Latvian female artists as well. Now let's talk about a bit of the Soviet oppression, as I already mentioned with the female emancipation. So after the Second World War, around 1945, so Latvia was occupied by the USSR, or the Soviet Union. And the culture that was growing and blossoming in the 30s and 20s really was repressed, and also as the Latvian people were repressed at that time. So everything that we learned, everything that we were really interested about in art and culture around us and building our own was repressed and denied from us at this time. So as every type of absolute leadership, or the Soviet leadership, the art became a weapon for the USSR or the Soviet Union, and the ideals and artists that refused to follow the new rules of what was acceptable and what wasn't, they were left with no jobs, no commissions, and sometimes even deported if they were really against, not only refusing maybe to create the right art, as you can say, but also rebelling against the current leadership in other ways. So the new rules basically, in simple terms, said that the art, what was acceptable was realistic art, that the art had to be about our great heroes of the nation or our work people, and how are we creating the best Soviet or socialistic regime. So this was the acceptable art. And the unacceptable art was everything else, especially the modern movements. So all of the movements, artistic movements like Impressionism and onwards, so Impressionism, Expressionism, Cubism, and so on, they were deemed as terrible, so not good, not acceptable. So everything had to be realistic and about those themes that were discussed and were allowed. And so the portrait and compositions of people, of figures, were the most prominent, and the landscapes and still lifes were valued as quite a bit lower than the other types of art at this time. So also, as you probably know from the lecture from the Art Museum, so those who could, they escaped, firstly to Germany, to Sweden, and then after from Germany to USA or even Australia and other places. So these are the, in my opinion, most prominent, most known places to where Latvians escaped, especially artists and other intelligent type of people. So, for example, some of also my distant relatives who were engineers, they also escaped at this time to Germany, and then from the camps to USA. So I also have relatives in the USA, quite a big bunch now. So they are still there, and also the communities of Latvians abroad from this point onward started to grow and be created. And well, as you may or may not know, this exiled culture, exiled people from Latvia, they were developing their own type of art because they didn't have the impact of the USSR rules. So some of them really, to this day, are still speaking Latvian. If they are speaking Latvian, from my own experience, I can say they are still speaking somewhat like people were speaking in the 30s, in the 40s in Latvia. So they have this a bit old language, and those people who stayed here, they had to suffer different kinds of ways. So we have a bit of another branch of Latvian art developing in Latvia as it developed in other countries where they were exiled Latvian artists and members of the people, maybe Latvian as well. So other people, not only artists, as you know. And as you already talked, and I believe know how the art in exile, so abroad, developed and was made. So we will let that be. Won't touch that anymore. So you know about that a little already. So let's look at the art that was made and created at the Soviet Latvia. So artists like Otto Skulme, Indulis Zariņš, especially you may see the surname Skulme, as I already mentioned, Marta Skulme. So Otto Skulme, the surname Skulme is really prominent in Latvian art. So this is a big family from which quite a bunch of big and great Latvian artists come from. So Skulme is one of the art surnames, as you will, in Latvia. So you can see the art at this point. And also Zariņš as well, the surname Zariņš also, which is more common in Latvia, but also the family of Indulis Zariņš also is really well known in Latvian art scene at this point even. So this was the type of art which the USSR allowed and wanted to be created. So something about the everyday tradition, the red flags, the celebration of someone who has worked hard and who deserves something, or also the depiction of some parts of the wars before. So they were, of course, for example, the War of Independence from our country, or the people who fought against Soviet Union before it was occupied, so it wasn't allowed to depict that. But of course, Latvian artists found clever ways how to hide what they really were thinking and saying at the pictures. So it was an interesting way of depicting something and then hiding it underneath something else. And here you can see again the monument of Latvian freedom, and also the monument of Lenin, so the leader of the Soviet Union. This monument was erected around the 50s, early 50s. So it's interesting because this monument, the Latvian Freedom Monument, wasn't demolished when the Soviet Union came to Latvia. So it was covered up in tarp or something. So and it was said that it was under construction or something like that, and it was saved from demolishment at this point. And this sculpture of Lenin's, as you can see, this one, you can see behind there's a trees, and there's the alley of trees, and the alley of trees ends, and where it ends, there is this sculpture. So they were at the same alley of trees, only in different parts. In different ends of them, and they were standing simultaneously together. Only difference was that the Monument of Freedom was covered, but Lenin's was not. And of course, in the 1991, 1992, when Latvia regained its freedom, this and other Lenins, Lenin was, the statue of Lenin was like a mandatory type of thing to be created and to be erected in every town in Latvia, and also in every town in Soviet Union, as you will. So when we regained our freedom, it was really great and interesting how people really just pulled them down and didn't care for them at all. So some of these sculptures are so demolished, and they are not in existence anymore. Some parts are, not all of them. So here is also some of the examples of the art in Latvia at that time. So also one of the female sculptors, Aleksandra Biede, she really was interested in the depiction of children and females at this time. So she a bit escaped and tried not to be in the Soviet Union political regime and depiction, but she couldn't quite escape that. As you can see, the children are wearing the uniforms of the Soviet Union and so on. And also the Edgar Siltners, you can see he was one of the members of, as you can say, the skarbais stils, so rough style, as translated from Latvian. So he was really, as you can see, there is in his pictures, there is this brush strokes that are quite prominent, quite seen. So he was one of the artists who managed to like walk the line between the modern or between the not realistic, like the more expressive art, and the realistic art. So he was depicting worker man coming from home or going to work, but the way how he depicted, you can see, is a bit more rough than the realistic type of the art would be. And when we go onwards around the 60s, so the 60s, 70s was the, you can say, the first time when the restrictions of what art could be and how could it be was loosened. So before that, if you didn't get with the program, as you can say, you were not getting paid. So, and even it was sometimes it was at that point where you couldn't even get money from other types of work that wasn't related to art, because all the government knew that you were a bad artist, and so you weren't given any work anywhere. So it was really hard for those artists who chose not to comply. So the restrictions, as I already mentioned, they were a bit loosened. So the artworks and how they could be depicted were a bit freer, and the more expressive art forms could be acceptable sometimes, and themes also were a bit loosened. So especially you can say that this artwork before, the Edgar Siltners one, so we saw those men walking, so this was also a bit looser than it could be acceptable. But also you can always remember that it isn't that the public and government really liked the artists who were a bit out there, you can say, and more abstract and not so realistic. So they weren't as much accepted by the public or by the government. They just could be there. It didn't mean that they could earn with it, really. So, and they were called, as you can say, so they were formal, so they were trying to different kinds of techniques and brushstrokes, so they were called as formalists. So they were a bit looked with the they were quite looked upon and quite watched. So if they didn't commit anything wrong or anything bad, so every art form, every art piece that was commissioned or that was entered for an exhibition was viewed and was judged before the exhibition, and the government just decided that this artwork was acceptable and this one wasn't, and they had to give the artwork back to the artists if it wasn't acceptable. So if it wasn't acceptable, you weren't acceptable, and so on and so forth. So it was quite hard to be an artist at this time. Well, it was quite hard to be a human being, actually, but we're talking about art. And here also, the 60s, 70s, some of the artists who were really expressive at this time. So Boris Bērziņš, you can see here the bright colored art. And also Rita Balner, one of our artists who was really interested in pastel painting, you can say. So also you can see the scene she's depicting. The theme is well, there's women and children, but also it feels quite Christian, quite like a bit religioustic. So it also wasn't quite acceptable, as you can probably see, of the Soviet times, to be a Christian or to go to church or so what. So this art, especially this work, really feels a bit more Christian than the others before it. So also two kinds of different, we can say, rebellions or expressions of other kinds of work at this time. And also already one other of the Skulme family, so Gemma Skulme, she recently passed, but she was still active, and she was active really in different kinds of painting, and she experimented until the day she passed. So she is one of our really great artists, especially women artists from the Soviet time and in our times as well. And also Jānis Pauļuks, you can see these different kinds of strokes, and here also a bit of tashism, so these pouring of the color, so like Jackson Pollock, you can say. So we know that Jānis Pauļuks was influenced by tashism, so Jackson Pollock was one of his heroes, I guess. Where else could he have learned this type of painting? So the experimental type of art was happening still at this time. It was just the difference of whether you got to exhibition your works, whether you got to show them, or whether you just had to create them, show them to 2 or 3 people, and then put them away. So, and then you couldn't get paid for them, and you couldn't live for the money you didn't have, because you didn't you weren't able to sell these types of paintings at this time. Also because the main commissioner was the Soviet Union, so you can see how that is unacceptable. Also, Gemma Skulme was one of the artists who tried to also work in the program. So she was one of the artists who worked at the Latvian Artists Union at this time. So she was trying to loosen a bit of the restrictions in this type of establishment. She was trying to give artists some money more, and other ways she tried to help from this type of establishment. So Latvian Artists Union was the place through which every single artist, if they wanted to become an artist, had to go through. So they had to be recognized of this union, so they could really work as an official artist at this time. And also one of our sculptors, female sculptor, Lea Davidova Medene. So as you can see, she was really interested in the portraits. She was making quite a bit of portraits of prominent people and of her friends and other artists. So here you can see 3 really different types of portraits at this time. So these are all portraits 60s to late 70s maybe. You can see something a bit of the Cubism, something a bit from the Impressionism, something a bit from the modern arts, from this type of, you can say, the rough styles, stingray stills, so when the lines are quite strong and straight, but they are not quite Cubism. So this one, for example, the bronze one, and also 3 different kinds of materials, so marble, granite, and bronze. Most of Latvian artists at this point really learned how to work with different types of materials. And this is also, I believe, one of the great characteristics of most of the Latvian sculptors nowadays. If they want to work with any kind of material, no matter female or male, they really learn that material by their own hands, and they rarely commission like other people to make them for them. And also at this time, so 1967 was the year when this great ensemble at Salaspils was erected. And this is a memorial for all the repressed people by the Germany, by the fascism and by their camps. So at Salaspils, there was this big concentration camp, which was created by the Germans shortly before the Soviet Union occupied Latvia. So before 1945, there was this labor and concentration camp there. So our sculptors and our landscape architects were allowed actually in being in the Soviet Union to create and plan this kind of monument. So you can see this isn't the monument for the Soviet Union, but it is a monument against the German, you can say, the German regime. So it is for the Latvians that were in this concentration camp and also other people. So these sculptures are really, really huge, and I really urge you to go and visit Salaspils memorials. It is really a grandiose feeling when you are there, and these figures, they are really big, as you can see here. And I believe there's a small museum, a memorial museum inside somewhere or underground. You can learn much more about this. But yes, so also here, there is some sort of familiarity with the Edgar Siltner's work of the workers going from the work. So the rough style, the stingrais stils, also the figures you can see, they are a bit realistic, but more expressive, more rough. Also around the edges, and rough as their depiction of the human being as well. And 10 years later in Riga, there was this monument, or the ensemble, erected, so the late 70s, early 80s. And this is the monument that was commissioned by the Soviet Union. So it is the Monument of Freedom, as we call it. And it is in the Freedom Park. The park is really great, and I think that the planning of this landscape and the monument and ensemble is also really great. But of course, there have been really big discussions about whether we should demolish it or not, because it is a monument of Soviet Union. So it's a monument celebrating the Soviet Union freeing our land from Germans, but in result, they occupied us. So it's kind of a monument and reminder of Soviet occupation. And this, yes, you can see that this monument consists of 3 big parts. So the five-star tower, you can say, and then 2 groups of figures. And the interesting part why I wanted to show you this is, remember when I told you about the Freedom Monument and the Lenin statue? So they were in one line. So they were at the 2 ends of one alley of trees. And this monument, if you watch from the way how the Freedom Monument is looking, so she's looking down over the river Daugava, over the Akmens Tilts, if you know it. So in the straight line, continuing, if you continue the line, you will end up at this monument. So they are all in one straight line. They are planned in one straight line. That is really interesting. And the other interesting thing is, if you watch the female here, you can see these are the warriors, the soldiers coming back from the Second World War home. That's the story. And the other part is the female, which is like waiting for them to come home. But this female was created by one of our sculptors, Ivars Gulbis. And he had planned this sculpture with a baby on her arm here. So there was supposed to be a small baby, small child on her arm. But when the Soviet Union, when the government saw the plan, they were really confused, because they told they had really big question, and they didn't want the baby there, because they were asking, so the soldiers were at war, and where did the baby come from? So as a symbol, it was like a symbol of new hope, like a small baby, small child. But at the reality, the government was thinking really like straight on about how did the baby get there? So from which non-soldier did it come from? Like, and that's why the baby isn't there. Yes, so this was the story about the monument. And now we come to the 80s. So the 80s was a really new wave of freedom and artistic freedom also. And one of the ways how this freedom was really open to the public was the Art Days Festival. So the 80s also was a time when Soviet Union was really getting weaker. and the restrictions and the control also was getting weaker. So they didn't quite have the control over the people they were occupied. They occupied over the countries they occupied. So around this time, there was a really big wave from the West, from the Europe and from the Americas, of performance art and happenings and other types of different art that wasn't painting or sculpture. So they really reached Latvian artists, and they were really interested in them. So they were freer to create also performances and happenings and contemporary like dances and a bit of a silent protest, if you will, artistically. So the Art Days Festival was really a place to do that. And the festival, the Art Days, was created in the 59, but the good place for it was really the 80s and 70s, where artists could really get a bit crazy, a bit crazier than usual, you can say, because they were like few days that they would just go out in the streets and create their art, and then the art was removed from the streets and it was all back to normal. But these few days were really a great way to express themselves. So at this point also the photorealistic art came about. So Miervalds Bolis is artist of this painting. And also Miervalds Bolis is the one sitting here in the bronze suit. So he didn't, he wasn't only a photorealistic artist, but he also really was interested in performance. So here you can see him in a bronze suit, and he had this whole happening where he would walk around Riga in a bronze suit, and also imagining he was a sculptor and staying still at some point. You can say he's here. He's staying as a bronze sculpture. So he, I believe there on YouTube, there should also be some sort of a video of him doing that. So if you're interested, you can just Google or put on YouTube, the Bronze Man, Latvia maybe, or something. And here are some pictures from the Art Days. So you can see a really crazy and fun activity time for artists and for the public. So this was also an event that the public was really into. You can see, if you have been in Latvia, this is the Doma laukums, Doma Square. So behind here is Doma Baznīca, and this is the building of Rīgas Birža, where the museum is, and this is the whole square. So it's full of people, and there is art being created. So people were really interested in this type of performances, happenings of new kind of art at this point. So the 80s also, I believe, was a time when the people were really interested in new types of arts as well, as opposed to 40s to maybe 60s, 70s, where they were more conservative and quite, I believe, a bit scared from the regime. But the 80s was, I believe, a breath of fresh air at this point from the arts and for the people as well. And this is also one picture of, as you can maybe see, the Last Supper of Leonardo da Vinci depicted here, just differently. And these are the artists. So this is not from the Art Days, but from different kind of event, but around the same time. So these are all artists, and they are creating this Last Supper. And then I believe they are creating some happening with involving them also in this Last Supper. So these are all our well, most of them are still alive, so they are creating art still. And these are Latvian artists which were made in the Soviet Union times. So they were starting to create at that point, and now they are still creating and teaching other. I believe one of them is one of my teachers. I believe this one is one of my teachers. So I went to art school in high school, so he taught me drawing, I believe. So these are all people that were involved in Latvian art scene, as well as educating the next generations of artists as well. And then the 80s and the 90s, and maybe even the start of the 2000s. So the art became much more freer. much more diverse, much more interesting, and the artists could do more of what they wanted. So here are two examples of that as well, quite different examples. So after this whole great Soviet Union fell down at the early 90s, and we regained our freedom. So this period was really quite interesting for Latvian art and also for the people. So this was, the previous time was quite hard for everyone, and also the art and culture. And when we regained our freedom, it was a really big wake-up call for everyone at every kind of level. So we had to understand, what would our government be like? What would our people be like? What were the rules and so on? Where were we getting the money and so on and so on? So it was quite understandable that art and culture wasn't a priority at this time, because we had to create our country from scratch at this point. So maybe taking something from our first freedom. So at the end of the World War I. So there were some things that we kept from that, but other things, as the world was really changed at this point, we had to make a new country. So art wasn't that needed. Well, it was, you can say, maybe spiritually needed, but at the business and economical point of view, it wasn't quite needed at this point. So artists had to once again reimagine themselves, because even those who had commissions from the Soviet Union before, they didn't have any commissions from our current government. So there were coming some funds funds were coming from abroad, especially from America. So the artists could create, but also the freedom that it came with was really great, and the artists really had to create their own art. And well, for those people who didn't know how to do anything else, this was a really great time if they could to create whatever they wanted. But the bad thing from this was that there wasn't really a market to sell any of their creations. Well, not in Latvia, anyways. So in the early 2000s, the Latvian art really became free and more interesting and more diverse and more hard to follow. So because everyone was doing everything as it is right now, which is even more hard to follow any type of art at this point, because everything's so mixed and so together, and people are doing different types of stuff every day. So one of the artists, which is really known at this point, and from this point onwards also now, is Ojārs Petersons. And if you know Rundāls Pils, so this is the Rundāls Palace, and this is one of his creations. So he really likes the color orange, and this is his orange arc. And it was like a statement piece, I guess, but more like a visual statement, not a like a political one. So he just drove around and placed it in different kinds of places. So for example, in contrast to Rundāls Pils, there was this orange arch. Or in our National Museum in Riga also, there was this orange arch just standing there. So, and Ojārs Petersons, yeah, so he, as I already mentioned, he really likes the color orange. And if you have been or know about the National Library of Latvia, so the big great building at the coast of Daugava, River Daugava, there is an orange vase standing next to this. So it's not on the side of Daugava, it's on the other side. So there is this orange vase. It's quite big. It's like 2 meters maybe, and it's a bit like broken. So there's a piece cut off it, and that is also one of Ojārs Petersons' work. So he's still working, and he's still well, you can say he's a conceptual artist, so he's still making these conceptual works. And the other small piece of the vase of the orange vase is also in the area. It's just in a bit further away from the library. So it's like a piece from the vase. It's in over the street in a green square down there. So the orange color is one of the things I associate with Ojārs Petersons really well, because these works are like 20 years maybe apart. So it's still quite interesting that to know that orange is his color, I guess. And also one of the artists of the early 2000s and nowadays also, Kristaps Dielzis. So he was really interested at some point in pop culture. So the pop art, as you can see here, similarities with some pop art as well. And also he was really interested in the watercolors, but in an interesting way. You can see that this painting is almost like a statement. You can see the camera here, and then this dark square, which also is dripped. So it's kind of like a symbolism, but also like a commentary of our culture, maybe, of our streets, maybe. So it's interesting how our, well, not the newer artists, but also the already quite well-established artists are viewing our world and maybe Latvia. And also two female artists, Aija Zariņa, you can see here, she's much more primitive, you can say, in her forms, and Francesca Kirke, who is also, you can see, into the American types of culture and also a bit of the Greek style. So she's quite realistic, but she mixes the media, you can say, or mixes the messages maybe, and creates from the Greek myth or Roman myth, she creates something that is a bit funny or a bit compiled with other types of art. And also, if we are talking about the Latvian art today, I think this is one of the more interesting examples. So the artist Gins Gabrāns, for recent, like maybe 5 or 7 years, he has really been interested in the digital arts. So he has an app called Sun, you can see here, so Sun. And if you download it in your camera on your tablet, you can put it towards your surroundings and see different types of, different types of, I don't know what that is, creatures maybe floating around you. So I've tried it for quite a time. It's really interesting. And I believe you can try it too. I don't know if it works only in Latvia. I don't believe so, but you can try it if you're interested. So yes, the digital arts are really also quite evolved, and from the 2000s, it was one of the imperative things to start to teach at the art academy and at the high school level of art education as well here in Latvia. So there were really many artists that were really interested in computer art at that point from the beginning, since it was available here. And other artists like Katrīna Neiburga, who is also really well known. She likes to make like contemporary art from different and lots of parts. So there's a video here at this artwork. So there's a video, and then there's these visual depictions and the tree bark. So she is like a multi-artist. She creates art from different kinds of media at the same time. Also Andris Eglītis, who likes to more maybe do more with the environment, so create stuff in environment. Or there was this artist, I'm afraid to say that it's Andris Eglītis, but maybe he is, who just exhibition his paintings in the woods. So he just put them at the base of the tree trunks and left it there. So it was an exhibition there without an opening, without anything fancy, without a gallery, without a museum. So also many of our artists are interested in how to be in nature and how to work with nature, I guess. And also the Alexejs Naumovs. So he was the last rector, last director of Art Academy. Now it's Kristaps Zariņš. So he's the I guess the ex-director of the Art Academy. So you can see he is much more into brighter colors. So it's not like Latvians are just gray, and it's not like Latvia is really rainy all day, every day, and 365 days of the year. So there are really quite a lot of artists that enjoy bright colors and painting abroad, especially Alexeis Naumos really enjoys painting in Venice and in other parts of Italy and in France. And also he, I believe, had a plein air in New York. So he's really interested also in the bright colors and different types of landscapes. And then in Latvia. So the last thing I would like to show or tell you is the Purvītis Prize. I don't know if Latvian Art Museum already mentioned it, but the Purvītis Prize is named after Vilhelms Purvītis, so the artist of Latvia we talked about, and it is it began in 2008. So it is a prize which is given every 2 years to an artist about an exhibition. So there is an international jury which nominates artists, their exhibitions during this period of time. So the last Purvītis Prize was given this year. So the 2 years before that, there were these nominees of artists and their exhibitions. And then at the end of 2000, so it was I believe it was given in June. So in June 2021, the jury decided, and this year's laureate was Amanda Ziemele. You can see her here and a bit of her exhibition that was the winning one. And if you like to know more, you need to Google it and try it and read about it more. But basically, every 2 years, there is this new artist, or maybe not so new sometimes, which gains the prize, which comes with money also. And also every 2 years, we have the prize for the art veterans, as you will. So every 2 years also there is a prize, a scholarship for the old artist, which has given something to our country or our art scene. So this is the prize that is most prominent in Latvia in terms of visual arts. And I believe that you can see also the nominees and winners of Purvītis Prize. I believe they have their own homepage since the 2008. So it is also a really good big honor, because I believe this is the only big prize in Latvia for visual arts. So if you are a laureate or even a nominee, you get to create an exhibition. So Purvītis Prize has an exhibition every 2 years with all the nominees. They get to exhibit their works at the same time, so in one big hall. And then also there is, I believe, the viewers' prize, so which one is the most loved by public and so on. So if you haven't, maybe if you have missed some of the exhibitions that are nominated at the Purvītis Prize, you can also see whole of it or a part of it at the big Purvītis Prize exhibition of the nominees as well. So this is the overall introduction of Latvian art. I hope you learned something, and I will try to answer to your questions right now.
Liels paldies, Paula. Tas lieliski.
Paldies.
Just one question about the Brīvības piemineklis. Different people have told me different things about the symbolism of the 3 stars. Okay. Maybe you have something about this, which is a bit more true.
Well, what have you heard?
I've heard that the Soviets changed some meanings of it, supposedly, when it was not destroyed, but was there. I have heard that it is represents the 3 Baltic countries. I've been told it represents something else, but people don't know what, and I forget others.
Well, about the Soviet commentary, it could be true that they invented at this point some type of new meaning to preserve the monument, because that could be a really realistic commentary. But from what I have learned and know, that these 3 stars are usually thought of as the 3 lands of Latvia. So they are regions of Latvia. Now we have 4, you can say. We have Kurzeme, Latgale, Vidzeme, Zemgale. These are the big regions of Latvia. And also we had the small one, which is Sēlija. But at that point, we only mentioned 3. And Sarmīte, if you remember which 3, because I am blank at this point. Tu zini, Sarmīte, kurus 3? Kuras zemes? Nav mikrofons. Kur Zemgale, Latgale, tu saki? Okay, so 3 of these countries are, 3 of these regions are the 3 stars.
Yeah.
That is the main symbolism.
Liels paldies.
Okay.
That's what I heard, that it was regions, 3 regions.
Yes.
And that there aren't enough stars, really. There should be more stars.
Yes, yes, they should be more, yes.
Yeah. Could I just ask, I'm particularly...
Could you speak a bit louder? I barely hear you.
I'm particularly interested in the paintings by Julius Feders. Is that
yes.
Where can I see these pictures in Riga in particular?
Some of them are in the National Museum of Art. I don't know if Riga's Birža has them. It's another branch of the National Museum. It's in the Dom Square, Dom Laukums. But in the big museum, you should be able to see some of them. That should be yes, because I don't think it would be weird if Julius Feders wasn't in the museum seen. Well, you couldn't see him, but maybe, well, also the internet as well. But there is, let me check just really quick. National Museum has its own database of art, but it is quite unfinished and quite hard to follow. So I don't know if I don't see any Julius Feders there, but the National Art Museum should have 2, maybe more of his paintings on display.
Right. Only 2?
Well, you see,
Latvian artist?
Latvian Art Museum isn't that big at all. And it should be more, but at this point, there are so many artists that we like to display that there are only like as many as we like to display, then as much as we display, then there needs to be like 2 or 3 pictures of one artist if we like to display like 20 of them. But if you like to display 10 of them, then it's like more pictures. But I think that if you visit the National Art Museum, you could just ask the woman or man sitting there, maybe where there is Julius Feders painting and how many there are seen here, because they will show you. I haven't been at the museum recently, so I don't remember how many, but there should be, I believe, at least 2. And it's shame, yes, that you can't see more, but well, you can Google it. It's not real life, but
no,
it gives an impression.
I like to see them for real.
Yeah.
That's on the internet.
Yeah, that's a different feeling. Yeah, of course.
I have another question about the Monument of Freedom.
Yeah.
Is it really, was it really covered for 45 years?
I don't know how much covered, but it was some of the stories I've heard, because I don't remember the real, like the legit reasons why. But it was told that it was under construction, that something had to be like, and I don't know
Yeah.
how you need to research that, yeah, for yourself if you need like specific answers. But yes, it was
Okay.
preserved in that way, that they told that it needed
Yes.
something to be
I
repaired.
mean, the reason is okay, but it's strange if it's covered really almost half a century.
I don't believe all of it
Mm,
was covered. But yes, you
part
need
of it.
to
Okay.
look into it. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't remember it right now.
For me, the most beautiful was the painting with a camera on a wall
Yeah.
and kind of barcodes downside. Could you show it again? And who was the artist? I want to.
Yes, just a minute.
It reminds me the artworks of the famous Chinese IVV.
So this one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very,
So
very beautiful.
yeah. Oh, it's a low quality image, so I won't zoom into it. But Kristaps Dielzis, yes, this is the author you can see here.
Yeah.
Kristaps Dielzis. And he has, I believe, not one but more of these types of paintings where he drips paint and different types of, with most of them monochrome, so different types of watercolors, this style. So if you check him out, you should probably see more than one of his paintings, like this type of paintings, this technique.
And I like to know what is your understanding from this, because I have my own ideas that what the artist is talking about.
So the symbolism, you mean, like what do I
Yeah.
get? Okay, so for me the first impressions are that somebody is always watching. That is the first thought in my head when I see this. And the other one is the night, so the darkness of the painting, and also it reminds me a bit of rain, because you see how it drips at the bottom of the painting. So it's yes, the first is we are always being watched, which is a bit terrifying actually. I suppose we are used to it by now, but the symbolism is that what I get from it, but I really enjoy the technique. So for me the symbolism is one thing, but the technique of these dripping, and in Latvian we call it lazējums. So it's when you take a brush of really unconcentrated, so not concentrated color, and drip it like as many times as it takes to make the color be there. So, and it drips and it drips and it drips. And for me, this feeling trumps the feeling of we are being watched. So I really more from this picture, I really more enjoyed the technique, which I myself really love to do as well.
What I want to say is at the bottom, you see things like the price barcodes.
Yeah.
And these price barcodes are the base for this artwork, which means that the base is getting ruined at the same time, because it is kind of the rotten carpet or rotten something. So for me, it's also a meaning that we base everything on like prices, or we value things by prices, or kind of like capitalism, and it is destroying our world, which is already gray.
Well, yeah, of course, and that's the beauty of the art, don't you think? That you can see
Yeah.
what most aches you, or what do you most love about this world, about yourself. So it's a really great way of seeing what really bothers you, maybe. So yes, I agree. It's really interesting. Your interpretation is good. It's right. It's interesting. Every interpretation in art is right, in my opinion, because it's yours. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Tā, es gribu pateikt par brīvības pieminekli. Būs ekskursija par Rīgu, tad droši Roberta un Tom varēs uzdot jautājumu par brīvības pieminekli. Būs gids, kas atbildēs uz šiem jautājumiem. Okay.
Jūs kāpsiet arī augšā?
Nē. Līpus.
Labi. No, because that will be a great way of knowing more. So when you get the excursion around Riga, so you get to ask the questions about the Monument of Freedom. That's great. Okay, is there anything else?
I'm just interesting about the app you mentioned. The name is San, right?
San, yes, S-A-N, 3 letters.
I found it on Google Play, but does it only work near the sculpture or something when you are actually in that place?
Because I think you should try it where you are, because I remember some of people being abroad and using it and seeing the creations. I can see them in my bedroom as well. So they're all around Latvia, definitely. But I don't, because the artist Gens Gabrāns, he had the time where he was always adding to it. So I don't know if it is really, you can see it from where you are. I hope you can, because it's like quite fun.
Diemžēl,
okay,
there are many under the Latvia, but there only one in China, and it's in Shanghai.
Okay, so it's only in one place. Okay.
Yeah, only one.
Well then, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I hope I can.
Bad.
Yeah, when I go to Latvia, I hope this can work.
Yeah, you should definitely try it. It's really interesting.
It's very interesting to me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Laikam viss jau.
Okay, anything else? No?
All was clear. Visiem skaidrs ir.
Well, then I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for your attention.
Liels paldies tev, Paula, par brīnišķīgo lekciju, un es domāju, ka visiem patika. Paldies tev liels. Jā, labi.
Paldies, čau.
Paldies tev liels.
Paldies.
Veiksmīgi. Atā. Viss.